A lot of things spoken on during the course of the deliberations and discussions. The members of this panel that are up here are here to speak on their own behalf. Obviously, you raise the questions as you will. The conference is a very broad spectrum of individuals, as you can see, from one end of the spectrum to the other, but we often find our way to the middle in terms of our deliberations in these matters. So to my first left is Bishop Robert Dealey of the Diocese of Portland, Maine. Bishop Dealey is the chair of the Canonical Affairs Committee. Is that correct?
That's right.
And to his left is Auxiliary Bishop Andrew Cousins, who is on the administrative board that was very involved in many of the deliberations leading up to this. Also in the room with us is Bishop Robert Barron, Auxiliary Bishop of Los Angeles, who will be available following the press conference, as will, I think, most of us who are up in the panel. Some have to run out. I didn't get a chance to ask them ahead of time. So let's I'll bring it back to Judy, and we'll follow on the same, well, we heard it kind of direct where we're going to.
Yeah, so similar to yesterday, if you would kindly raise your hand, I will call upon you, and please state your name, the news organization you're with, and then to whom you are addressing your question on the panel. And then also please wait for the handheld mic too, so that we can be sure to hear your question. Thank you. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and open the floor for our first question. Yes, Mark. Mm-hmm.
Here comes the microphone, Mark.
Yeah,
behind you.
Right behind you.
Thanks. Mark Pattison from Catholic News Service. At the risk of sounding like I'm repeating myself in the asking of this question, can you get a sense of the House in determining what a sense of the House resolution or statement might emanate before the official business of this meeting is over?
Do you want any particular one of us to, did you direct that towards one of us? Go ahead, Bob.
You know, I always find it interesting how ideas emerge out of a session like this, which is kind of freewheeling in addition to dealing with the issues. But I did think it interesting to see the way in which the discussion concerning the Metropolitan Tribunal or the Archbishop of the region started to evolve in the course of the discussion. That was an interesting thing. I also think that perhaps we were reminded of the nagging reality of the McCarrick situation and how that weighs heavily on everyone right across the country. I thought that was an important takeaway from this as well. And I think it's in those kinds of conversations that the suggestions emerge. Those of us who are responsible for documents today will now have, over supper, go over all the amendments and see what kind of emerging consensus there is concerning those documents that way.
I would just add that I think you're seeing firm resolve from the bishops around a whole set of issues that are very important and I think really could be called the culture change that people are looking for, right? You're seeing firm resolve around things like the involvement of laity in this process. You've seen lots of comments and questions today about transparency and how we can be involved in self-reporting, right? So questions about lists, questions about what's the role of laity in review boards. So it seems that the principles upon which our motions were built are not being questioned. It's the question of how do we put them into practice, right? And what will be the resolve of the body at the end of the day, I think, is yet to be seen. And what will be the action that we take at the end of the day is yet to be seen.
Okay, Michael. Yeah, that's right.
Michael Drake with American TFP. Bishop Dealey, is there a way to explain in a very basic sense the canonical struggle that's going on between Rome and the Bishops' Conference in the question of discipline of bishops? Is it the basic problem that Rome is responsible for disciplining the bishops and is not doing it, and we're trying to do it from this side, or is it some type of a disharmony in another in a really layman's terms.
I have spent a lot of time explaining this to the people of Portland, Maine, and trying to help them to understand what part of what's going on. The structure of the church is such that all 3,000 bishops around the world report to one bishop, the Bishop of Rome. That's the fundamental issue. And that's the structure of the church, that each bishop is himself, as was pointed out in the discussion today, a vicar of Christ. But we have, our principle of unity is the Holy Father as the Bishop of Rome, successor of Peter. And so it is to him that all matters of discipline, appointment, and everything else are deferred. And he, of course, does that not personally, but through the apparatus which we call the Holy See, which is the congregations and dicasteries and the different offices of what most people would refer to as the Vatican, but which technically is called the Holy See. That carries out the authority of the Holy Father. So in these instances, we have who is going to take responsibility for these investigations and things of this nature. I believe that the measures that we have put forward here are voluntary measures. They are not doctrinal. They do not involve a change in the teaching of the church or in what I have just articulated as the way in which the church is organized, but rather us as individual bishops putting ourselves under the standards of accountability, or the commission which will investigate those the adherence to those standards of conduct, and by so doing, we simply voluntarily place ourselves in that. It does not, and because the end result of any of this is that it would be referred to the Pope's representative in the United States, who is the Apostolic Nuncio, who then brings it to the proper office in the Holy See, which is responsible for bringing it to the Holy Father. So I think that what we're talking about is putting ourselves voluntarily under these things.
So if the bishop chooses to not follow those, what sanctions are there?
These are voluntary. So if a bishop does not choose to place himself under them or to ascribe to them and feels that he continues to live under the discipline of the Holy Father as it exists, because we're all under that discipline already, which was pointed out today. The whole question of the Metropolitan and all the rest of that is the continuing reality of the church.
Okay, great. Let's go with Chris, please.
Chris Gunty from Catholic Review Media in Baltimore. Bishop Cozzens, perhaps you can best address this, but we heard a lot of frustration in the room today from Dr. Banis, from Dr. Cesareo, and from your brother bishops and yourself. What do you do with that frustration to turn it into information that Cardinal DiNardo can take to Rome in February?
I think that the end result is yet to be determined, what that will all turn into. I do think that, it was expressed by several bishops today that there's a desire to work in communion with the Holy Father, but to let the Holy Father know what are our needs. What are the needs of the American church that we see as bishops here on the ground, and what we're hearing from our people, what we're hearing clearly from the National Review Board, and also from the National Advisory Council. They give very clear reports today. And so certainly that's something the Holy Father is going to want to listen to, and what we want to be able to present clearly is what are the needs that we have here. And I do think that one of the clearly felt needs of the body is for some greater accountability for bishops because of the desire that we all have to exercise that accountability in whatever ways we can fraternally through a covenantal relationship.
Okay, great. Father Reese.
Tom Reese from Religion News Service. Bishop, one of the difficult issues that bishops are facing is if they put out a list of priests who have been accused, what's the criteria for putting them on that list? You know, credible, substantiated, all of those kinds, and what do those words mean? My first part of my question is, as a canon lawyer, what's your advice to bishops on that? And second, as a fallback, could a bishop simply say, leave this to the discretion of the review board, his lay review board, and say, if they say his name should go up, it goes up. If they say it doesn't, it doesn't. Anyway, how do bishops decide whose names go up on these public lists?
I think that what you heard today was that there are lots of different thinkings on this, but I do think, as a canon lawyer, that one of the things we have to be very conscious of is a person's right to a good name. And therefore, we have to be very careful how we compile a list like that. I think it should be a substantiated allegation myself, but the problem is there's no agreed upon meaning of what a substantiated or credible, what these different terminologies mean. I see credible as the beginning. In other words, it fits that the man was in the parish at the time and it could be. And then you start the investigation. Substantiated, for me, is there's more proof than just the circumstantial evidence. There's substantive proof. There's the victim spoke to somebody else or something of that nature. But I do think that the communion of the church requires me to do what I do in collaboration with the people I serve. That's the review board on one thing. It's my executive council, which is all the people that work with me, and it's the diocesan pastoral council and all the rest of that. In making decisions of that kind, I think it's important to consult with all of those people and to make sure that those who have particular expertise have helped in that. And I think that particularly the review board would have an especial expertise in that matter, knowing what is legal as well as what is right, because there are issues around the legality of producing names as well, and as I say, a person's right to his good name. So I think it's a complicated issue. I think the discussion today shows us a certain direction, and I think our National Review Board will be helpful in that, as well as our own individual review boards, because state law differs in different ways. And some of those lists are already out and published with the help, as was the case in our state, of the Attorney General back in 2002, 2004. The list came out of all of that kind of investigation. So,
as a practical matter, from an archdiocese that published our list in December of 2013, we use the review board to determine if it's a substantiated claim. So the review board tells us if it's a substantiated claim, and if it's substantiated, then it goes on to the list.
Okay, next question. Yes, a gentleman right here with the glasses. Mary, right there. Thank you.
Ed Condon from Catholic News Agency. Just following on from Father Reese's question, is there a problem either with the proposed independent commission or existing diocesan review boards reaching a determination of substantiated as opposed to credible? It's my reading of the norms of Sacramentorum Sanctitatis Tutela that really the preliminary investigation stage is to determine whether or not the accusation is manifestly false or frivolous. Is any determination higher than that somehow exceeding the mandate that exists? And is that part of the problem that perhaps the Holy See had with some of the proposals that the conference was looking to debate?
I mean, part of the issue is that we're dealing with most cases, if not the vast majority of cases, involve cases that are beyond the statute of limitations. So they were never adjudicated in a court of law as to finding of the truth of the matter or the non-truth of the matter. So we have a lot of cases in which there's an allegation that's made, there is some investigation, there is some material around it that can help it be prove whether it's substantial or not, but none of them were really, there was no really deep dive into the allegation. So you're dealing with a lot of stuff from the past, you're looking at a lot of things that we just never had a resolution on, and some of them we never had an investigation. So that's why we use phrases like substantiated rather than found or something like that. So part of the problem is, again, how do you deal with these cases that are way beyond the statute of limitations, that have never been adjudicated, In the case of my diocese, just like Bishop Dealey's diocese, it's being handled by a lay board, completely separate, arm's distance from me. They're the ones that are going to make the decision on these matters. And they're basically saying, is this reasonable? Does it pass the reason? Can a reasonable person look at this case and say, yes, this is substantial enough to actually make the name public?
I do want to make the distinction that SST really, Sacramentorum Sanctitatis Tutela, that initial finding, which says that it has credibility, is just that. It isn't a proof that in fact there's an allegation. That is to be established by whatever process the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith determines is to be carried out, administrative or judicial.
So in effect, that's my question, Bishop, is by having diocesan review boards or this proposed independent commission make an additional determination of substantiated rather than just merely credible, are they exceeding the mandate and going into the territory of what belongs to the proper canonical process determined by Rome?
No, because I think, as Bishop Coyne points out, a lot of the cases that are causing the difficulties in making those decisions are cases which did not come under the charter and did not, are older cases where there was no adjudication and none of these conditions were available to make those determinations. Anything that's happened since 2002, those minimal cases that have occurred, has a different way and a different criterion for being able to.
And the Holy See is not going to take a case of a dead priest.
No, the Holy See is not going to take a case of a dead priest.
Okay, great. Next question, JD.
I've known you a long time, so I always want to say Monsignor Dealey, Bishop Dealey. I think
JD, how are you?
How are you? I think that's part of the question that Ed's asking is, it sounds like the use of this term substantiated can cause problems because it undercuts the rule of law, which has positives and negatives. But some of those are that there's prescription in the life of the church. People have a right to due process under whatever code they committed a delict under. And when we use terms like substantiated, don't we run the risk of impugning the innocent, or at least those who can't be proven guilty, or those for whom prescription has expired? I mean, where did the protection of rights come in with those kind of terms?
Well, that's precisely the point, that I think that it does have to have some kind of process by which a determination is made. And sometimes that can be the review board, or it can be a court of, it can be an adjudicated matter or whatever. But I do think it has to go beyond credible in the sense that it's not just an allegation which comes in, but it is something which has some substance to it along the way. So I do think that that's one of the ways in which we protect the innocent.
Great. Okay, Jack.
I'm Jack Jenkins with the Religion News Service. So there's a lot of conversation about the publication of priests' names and dioceses doing that independently. And a lot of those efforts often have law enforcement officials on those commissions, at the diocesan level who review that. But there is another system, which is that some dioceses have just given their files to law enforcement to review. And there are those who say that would be the most appropriate action, who have called for dioceses to simply give their clergy files to law enforcement, with the idea being that the church can't police itself. So what do you say to those who would prefer that these sorts of investigations bypass the priest listing scenario and just allow law enforcement to do its job, acknowledging that many dioceses have already been investigated in the last 10 years since the Spotlight report?
I would not acknowledge that we turn it over because we're not incapable of doing it ourselves. I think in the case of my diocese, I wasn't there, so I can only talk about what they did do, which I think was a good process. In 2002, Archbishop Joseph Gary decided that he needed to have the help of the Attorney General of Maine, and so the Attorney General agreed with the district's attorney of the 16 counties of Maine, and the consultors of the diocese went through all the cases, and they prepared them, and then they were reviewed. The ones that had allegations or accusations of any kind were then all taken over by the Attorney General, and then they studied them to make sure everything was done. So it was a cooperative, collaborative process. It seems to me that's a fine way to do it, if that's possible.
I would say the other struggle we're often dealing with is that law enforcement doesn't want to investigate a particular case because they can't, there's no crime to be charged, right? So maybe it's a dead priest who we have an accusation against, or it's a priest where the statute of limitations has run. And so they're not going to investigate it because there's no crime to be charged, so therefore we have to investigate it to find out if it's a substantiated claim or not.
Okay, great. We've got time for just one more question from the floor. Dan, please, back row.
Hi, Daniel Burke from CNN. We've heard a lot today about what some bishops think might be the causes behind why we're at where we're at now. I'd be interested in hearing from each of you what you think has brought the church to this point, given the time constraints we have, but what is the prevailing issue that brought the church to this moment? What is the problem that needs to be solved the most to restore trust, to get the church working again? It can't all be cable news and blogs, right? So what is it that the church needs to do? What has been done wrong in the past that brought the church to this moment? That could be for Bishop Deely, Bishop Cozzens, and anyone up there.
I'm happy to answer, but
I think that what I hear from the people of God, who I have been listening to over these last 4 or 5 months in a special way around this issue, the Archbishop McCarrick case has particularly upset them because it is not only our people are very understanding, and one of the ways in which we made it through the sex abuse crisis was that they understood that human failure and sin is part of life and is part of the life even of their priests. And so they could, to a certain extent, understand that. If you think about it, the ones that they didn't understand were the serial abusers. That's where people went rightfully ballistic, because they felt that the people responsible were not carrying out their responsibility. In the case of Cardinal McCarrick, Archbishop McCarrick, you have a situation in which a priest became a bishop, became a bishop of one diocese, an auxiliary bishop in a major metropolitan diocese, a diocesan bishop, an archbishop, and then an archbishop and cardinal. So what the people don't understand is this behavior must have been known because people are saying it was known. And how did these promotions happen? I think that's where the problem, it seems to me, of lack of trust is. Can we trust you insofar as, just as it is with the priests, okay, we understand sin and failings, but we don't understand serial things and continuing move it around. Isn't that what people complained about in 2002? It wasn't so much the fact that there were individual people who did this terrible thing, but the fact that they were moved around, which created the lack of trust. And in this instance, it's that a man got promoted even though there was predatory behavior in his background, which should have eliminated him from consideration.
I would just add, I think that the ultimate failure we had was a failure to live the gospel. And that bishops are supposed to live the gospel, and that is to live according to the morality that Jesus promotes for us, and bishops failed to do that, right? They failed to act with integrity at various times, and because of that, it causes problems. Now, that doesn't mean all bishops didn't fail in that way, but there was clear failure that led us to this place. And we definitely need processes for accountability, because bishops too are human beings and we need ways to be held accountable. But as has been said several times today, what's also needed is interior conversion. And it's by the holiness and integrity of our leaders that we'll get out of this crisis. And it's the lack of integrity in certain cases that got us into this crisis.
Great. All right. This will conclude our press conference. Thank you for all your questions. And again, a reminder that we will have another press conference here tomorrow night at 5:30 as well. So thank you so much.
I think some of the bishops would be available for some more one-on-ones in front. So we'll come down, spread out. Bishop Barron's here. And so if you want to do a few more one-on-ones for a few more minutes, because they've got places to be and friends to meet.
Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Amendments to read.
Thank you.
Amendments to read, too.